They built half the skyline of Pittsburgh. They literally created the IRS, and at their peak they controlled more wealth than most nations. But you won't find the Mellon name splashed across headlines today. That's exactly how they wanted it. While the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts fought for newspaper inches, the Mellons perfected the art of invisible power. They didn't just play the game of American capitalism. They wrote the rule book, then hid it in a vault. Start with this fact. In the 1920s, Andrew Mellon served as Treasury Secretary while simultaneously running a banking empire that financed his own government policies. Conflict of interest? The term barely existed yet. He was essentially regulating himself and nobody could stop him. But that's getting ahead of the story. The foundation begins in 1869 with Thomas Mellon, a judge-turned-banker who saw something other Pittsburgh families missed. While steel barons like Carnegie grabbed headlines, Thomas quietly positioned his bank as the funding source behind them all. T. Mellon and Sons became the silent partner in every major industrial expansion. Oil refineries needed capital. Mellon provided it. Railroads needed financing. Same answer. The genius wasn't in producing anything tangible. It was in owning the money that made production possible. His son Andrew took that blueprint and turned it into an empire that would reshape America. Born in 1855, Andrew Mellon didn't invent industries. He perfected the model of strategic capital deployment at a scale nobody had attempted before. By his 30s, he'd already backed the creation of Alcoa, transforming aluminum from a laboratory curiosity into an industrial necessity. That single bet would generate billions across the next century. But aluminum was just the opening move. In 1889, Mellon made a decision that would echo through generations. He provided the critical funding for Gulf Oil, positioning the family at the center of the energy revolution before most Americans even owned automobiles. Think about the timing there. He wasn't reacting to demand. He was creating the infrastructure for demand that didn't exist yet. The Mellon method was brutally simple. Find entrepreneurs with vision but no capital. Provide the funding. Take majority control. Install professional management. Scale ruthlessly. Andrew didn't want fame. He wanted ownership. While other wealthy families built mansions and courted society pages, Mellon built an interlocking network of corporations that made him unavoidable in American commerce. By 1921, 3 presidents in a row appointed him Treasury Secretary. Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover all kept Mellon in power for 11 consecutive years. No Treasury Secretary before or since has held the position that long. During his tenure, he slashed tax rates on the wealthy, arguing that lower taxes would stimulate investment. Economists still debate whether he was right or simply engineering policy that enriched his own holdings, probably both. His influence didn't stop at tax policy. Mellon shaped the Federal Reserve's approach to monetary policy, guided international debt negotiations after World War I, and essentially controlled the flow of capital through the American economy. When he recommended financial policy, he wasn't offering theory. He was describing what his own banks would do regardless. The 1920s were the Mellon decade. While Gatsby parties and jazz clubs dominated popular imagination, Andrew Mellon was quietly engineering the financial architecture that made that prosperity possible. His banks financed the construction boom. His aluminum company supplied the material for new buildings. His oil company fueled the cars filling new highways. Every major economic expansion had Mellon fingerprints on it. But the family's real genius appeared in how they structured succession. Andrew's son Paul Mellon and nephew Richard King Mellon didn't just inherit wealth, they inherited a system. Paul focused on expanding the art collection and philanthropic presence, eventually donating enough to create the National Gallery of Art in Washington. That wasn't generosity, that was legacy engineering. Richard King Mellon took the industrial side, transforming Pittsburgh itself through strategic real estate development and corporate restructuring. He didn't just own building, he owned the urban planning process. When Pittsburgh needed to transform from a smoke-choked industrial city into a modern corporate center, Richard King Mellon decided how that transformation would look. City officials didn't propose plans to him. They asked what he wanted. The Mellon Bank became one of the most powerful regional banks in America, eventually merging into BNY Mellon, which today manages over $40 trillion in assets. Read that number again. Trillion, with a T. The bank that started as Thomas Mellon's small operation now touches virtually every major financial transaction in the global economy. But here's what separates the Mellons from every other wealthy dynasty. They never needed to be liked. The Rockefellers hired PR firms after public backlash. The Kennedys courted media obsessively. The Mellons simply didn't care what people thought. They operated through boards, trusts, and private agreements that kept their names out of public view while their influence grew deeper. Their art collection alone tells the story. Paul Mellon assembled one of the finest private collections of British and French art in existence, then donated the entire National Gallery building to house it. But the donation came with conditions about governance and control that essentially made it a Mellon institution in perpetuity. Generosity with strings attached is still control. The family's wealth today is nearly impossible to calculate because it's so thoroughly distributed through trusts, foundations, and corporate holdings. Conservative estimates put it above $10 billion. Realistic assessments suggest multiples of that figure when you account for art collections, real estate holdings, and stakes in dozens of corporations most people have never heard of. What makes them different from the tech billionaires dominating today's headlines? Time and structure. Jeff Bezos built Amazon in 2 decades. Elon Musk created Tesla's value in even less. The Mellons have been accumulating power and wealth for over 150 years, building systems that survive individual generations. They weren't just rich. They became infrastructure, and that's exactly why their story matters more than you think. Understanding the Mellons requires looking at what they own versus what they control. Ownership is documented, control is architectural. When you own the bank that finances the hospital, the foundation that funds the university, and the trust that develops the commercial district, you don't need to own the city, you are the city's operating system. Pittsburgh demonstrates this perfectly. The Mellon family doesn't govern Pittsburgh. They don't need to. Richard King Mellon Foundation assets exceed $2 billion, focused almost entirely on southwestern Pennsylvania. When they decide regional priorities, those become everyone's priorities. Economic development follows their investment thesis. Cultural institutions align with their philanthropic focus. Even urban planning bends toward their real estate strategy. This creates a feedback loop most people never see. Foundation grants fund studies. Studies recommend policies. Policies create opportunities. Opportunities benefit Mellon-adjacent interests. Nobody breaks laws. Nobody demands favors. The system just naturally flows in directions that strengthen existing Mellon positions. Compare this to how new money operates. When a tech billionaire wants influence, they buy a newspaper or fund a political campaign. Loud, visible, controversial. The Mellons embedded themselves so deeply into institutional fabric that their influence feels like gravity. You don't debate it, you plan around it. Their art strategy reveals the same thinking. The National Gallery houses their collection, bearing their name in perpetuity. But they also funded the Yale Center for British Art, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and dozens of smaller institutions. Each donation came with endowments for maintenance and acquisition. They didn't just give art away, they created permanent platforms for Mellon taste to define American cultural standards. Paul Mellon's personal collection alone was valued above $1 billion when he died. But its real value wasn't the price tags. It was the curatorial influence those donations created. Museums now pursue collecting strategies that align with proven Mellon interest because that's where institutional support concentrates. They shaped what Americans consider important art by controlling which art gets institutional backing. The family's corporate strategy followed similar patterns. Rather than dominating single industries like Rockefeller or Carnegie, they diversified early into banking, aluminum, oil, construction, and technology investments. When aluminum demand collapsed, banking profits absorbed the loss. When banking faced regulatory pressure, industrial holdings provided stability. They built redundancy into wealth itself. Gulf Oil, once a Mellon crown jewel, got absorbed into Chevron. But the family had already shifted focus decades earlier, moving capital into banking and real estate before oil's dominance peaked. They didn't ride industries into decline. They exited at optimal moments, redeploying into sectors positioned for next-generation growth. Alcoa followed a similar path. The Mellons took it public, maintained strategic influence through board positions and major shareholdings, then gradually reduced direct control while capturing value through financial instruments most investors never understood. They turned operational headaches into financial engineering opportunities. Their political influence operated through the same indirect channels. Andrew Mellon's Treasury tenure established precedent. When Mellons wanted policy outcomes after that, they didn't need cabinet positions. They funded think tanks that shaped economic consensus. They endowed university programs that trained future policymakers. They supported candidates who already agreed with positions Mellon institutions had spent years normalizing. This is power that doesn't require phone calls or personal intervention. It's structural. When the experts all trained at Mellon-funded institutions, when the research comes from Mellon-supported think tanks, when the cultural consensus formed around Mellon-defined priorities, you don't need to lobby. The system already thinks like you do. Modern wealth builders should study this approach carefully. Bezos and Musk chase market cap. The Mellons built institutional capture. Market cap fluctuates, institutions compound. Amazon's value depends on quarterly performance. The National Gallery will display Mellon taste for centuries, regardless of economic cycles. The family's current generation operates even more quietly than their predecessors. You won't find them on Forbes lists or social media. They govern through foundations, trusts, and private investment vehicles that don't require public disclosure. When they make moves, financial press might note a transaction months later without connecting it to broader strategy. Recent Mellon Foundation activity shows continued sophistication. They have moved heavily into urban agriculture, sustainable development, and technology infrastructure. Not because they're altruistic, because they recognize these sectors 20 years before mainstream capital did. Their grants seed entire industries, then family investment vehicles capture returns once viability proves out. This is patient capital with century-long time horizons. They don't need exits, they need positioning. Every foundation grant is both philanthropy and market research. Every institutional partnership creates information advantage. Every board seat provides early visibility into sectoral shifts. The Mellon story isn't just about one family's wealth. It's about how power actually works when you strip away the performance. Most rich people buy things. The Mellons bought the processes that determine what things are worth buying. Most wealthy families seek influence. The Mellons became the medium through which influence flows. Their banking empire touches your mortgage, your retirement account, your company's payroll system. Their foundations shape your city's development priorities. Their art donations define what your children learn represents cultural achievement. Their endowed university programs train the experts who advise your elected officials. You've never voted for a Mellon. You've never bought a Mellon product directly. Yet their preferences have shaped your life in ways both invisible and permanent. That's not conspiracy. That's just what happens when wealth compounds across 5 generations with strategic patience. The tech billionaires will fade, markets will crash, companies will fail. But the Mellons built something more durable than wealth. They built gravity. And gravity doesn't ask permission, it just pulls everything toward its center. The Mellons never needed to be remembered, they just needed to be inevitable. While you were watching Musk's tweets and Bezos's rocket launches, Mellon systems were processing your paycheck, financing your city's infrastructure, and shaping which art your kids study in school. They didn't win capitalism, they became the rules capitalism runs on. And the most brilliant part, you never even noticed they were playing.